The Anderson family dinners had always been a battlefield disguised as a feast. Tonight was no different, except that I had finally acquired the last piece of my puzzle, the entire Sunset Drive commercial district. James, we need to discuss your situation, my father began, cutting into his perfectly cooked steak. The fluorescent lights of their dining room cast harsh shadows across his face, making him look older than his 60 years. The shop isn't working out. I watched him carefully, noting how he avoided eye contact. After 15 years of running Anderson Holdings, my father had perfected the art of delivering bad news to failing businesses. Now he was using the same tone with me. My mother touched his arm softly. "We're worried about you, honey. Living above that tiny bookshop, barely making ends meet." From across the table, my brother Michael couldn't hide his smirk. He'd been waiting for this moment since I walked away from the family business 3 years ago. "Face it, little brother, some people just aren't cut out for business." I took another bite of my dinner, letting the silence stretch. The irony wasn't lost on me. While they saw a struggling bookshop owner, I had spent the last 3 years building an empire right under their noses. Every property on Sunset Drive, all 28 buildings, now belonged to Phoenix Enterprises, my company. "The building's worth more than that failing bookshop," my father continued. "We've had offers, good ones. As your family, we feel responsible." "How much?" I interrupted, keeping my voice calm. Michael leaned forward. "Does it matter? You can't afford it anyway." I pulled out my phone, pretending to calculate something. "Just curious about the market value." "7 million for the whole block," my father said. "We've already discussed terms with Brighton Development. They're planning to demolish everything, build a modern shopping complex." My mother dabbed her lips with a napkin. "Think of it as a fresh start, James. You could come back to Anderson Holdings. Your old position is still open." 3 years ago, that offer might have tempted me. Back then, I was just another VP at Anderson Holdings, watching my father and brother run our family's company into the ground with outdated methods and short-sighted decisions. Their answer to everything was demolition and generic retail spaces. "And what about the other businesses?" I asked. "The family-owned restaurants, the art galleries, the local shops that have been there for decades." My father waved his hand dismissively. "Progress requires sacrifice. Brighton Development understands the market. They're offering generous relocation packages." I thought about Mrs. Martinez's authentic Mexican restaurant, 3 generations old. Mr. Parker's art gallery that hosted local artists. The vintage record store where teenagers still discovered vinyl for the first time. All part of what made Sunset Drive special. "The contracts are ready," Michael added. "We just need your signature since you're technically still on the lease. But given your full financial situation, I'm sure we can work something out." I glanced at my phone again, this time reading a real message from my lawyer. "Final property transfer complete. All documents ready for tomorrow's meeting." Brighton Development representatives confirmed attendance. "When exactly were you planning to close this deal?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Brighton's board meets tomorrow at 10 a.m., my father replied. "The sooner we handle this, the better for everyone." Little did they know, I had called that meeting. Brighton Development had been trying to buy Sunset Drive for months, not realizing they were negotiating with my shell companies. Tomorrow would be interesting. "You know what's funny?" I set down my fork. "I remember bringing you a proposal 3 years ago. A plan to revitalize Sunset Drive while preserving its character. You said it was, what was the phrase? Naive idealism from someone who doesn't understand real business." Michael snorted. "Oh God, not this again. Your community-focused development plan. This is exactly why you're failing now." I stood up, straightening my jacket. "Thank you for dinner. I should head back to my failing shop. I have some paperwork to review before tomorrow's meeting." "James," my father's voice hardened. "Don't make this difficult. The decision's been made." "Yes," I smiled slightly. "It has." I left them sitting there, knowing it would be our last dinner under the old power dynamic. As I drove back to Sunset Drive in my deliberately modest Honda Civic, I thought about the journey that had led to this moment. 3 years ago, after my father rejected my proposal, I resigned from Anderson Holdings. But I didn't just walk away, I had a plan. The failing bookshop was just the beginning. Pulling into my usual parking spot behind the shop, I looked up at the historic building that had started it all. Anderson's Books, established 1922, had been a cornerstone of Sunset Drive long before my family's real estate empire existed. My grandfather had sold it to chase bigger developments, but I'd bought it back through a shell corporation. Inside, after locking up, I headed upstairs to my apartment. While my family thought I lived here out of necessity, the truth was more strategic. Living on Sunset Drive had helped me understand its rhythm, its people, its potential. I walked to my home office, a room my family had never seen. One wall displayed property deeds and architectural plans. Another showed financial projections and community development strategies. My failing bookshop actually turned a healthy profit, but more importantly, it had given me cover while I executed my larger plan. Opening my laptop, I reviewed tomorrow's presentation. 3 years of careful planning had led to this moment. While my family focused on Anderson Holdings' high-profile projects, I had quietly built Phoenix Enterprises into something far more substantial. Starting with the bookshop, I'd gradually acquired every property on Sunset Drive through various shell companies. Each purchase was strategic, timed to avoid attention. I negotiated fairly with owners, offering above-market rates and guaranteed leases for existing businesses. My phone buzzed, a text from Lisa, my chief operating officer. Final projections updated. Brighton's desperate. They'll pay anything tomorrow. I smiled, remembering how I'd met Lisa. She'd been a junior analyst at Anderson Holdings, brilliant but overlooked because she prioritized community impact over quick profits. When I left, she came with me, becoming instrumental in building Phoenix Enterprises.
Hey.
Another message arrived, this one from Mr. Parker at the art gallery. Everything ready for tomorrow's community meeting. Everyone's confirmed. That was the part my family didn't understand. While they saw Sunset Drive as outdated real estate ready for demolition, I'd spent 3 years building relationships with every business owner, understanding their needs, and developing a plan that would benefit everyone. I pulled out a thick folder labeled Sunset Drive Revitalization Project. Inside were detailed plans for historical preservation, modernization without demolition, and community-focused development. Everything my father had dismissed as naive idealism, backed by solid financial projections and community support. My phone rang, the private line only 5 people had access to. Mr. Anderson, my lawyer's voice was precise as always. Brighton Development's CEO just called. They're pushing to move the meeting earlier, 8 a.m. Apparently, your father suggested it. Of course he did. A classic Anderson Holdings tactic. Rush the other party, leave them off balance. Perfect, I replied. Have everything ready by 7:30. And Sarah, make sure the conference room cameras are recording. I want to preserve every moment. After hanging up, I walked to my window, looking out over Sunset Drive. The street lights cast a warm glow over the historic buildings. Even at night, there was life here. People dining at restaurants, browsing shop windows, enjoying the community my family wanted to demolish. Tomorrow would change everything, but tonight, I had one more task. I opened my safe and removed a stack of documents, the true ownership records of Phoenix Enterprises, proving my acquisition of not just Sunset Drive, but several other key properties Anderson Holdings had been eyeing. My brother Michael wasn't the only one who'd learned from our father. While they thought I was failing, I'd built something bigger than Anderson Holdings, using the lessons they'd taught me and the principles they'd rejected. My phone buzzed again, another message from Lisa. Your father just called Brighton's CEO. They're planning to present a take-it-or-leave-it offer first thing tomorrow. Should we adjust our strategy? No, I texted back. Let them make their play. Everything changes tomorrow anyway. I spent the next few hours reviewing every detail. The community development plan, the financial projections, the modernization strategy that would preserve Sunset Drive's character, while making it more profitable than any generic shopping complex. Around midnight, I heard familiar voices outside. Looking down, I saw Michael and 2 Anderson Holdings executives walking the street, probably planning how to divide up the properties once Brighton Development took over. This dump will be gone in 6 months. Michael's voice carried up to my window. Maybe we should let little James keep running the bookshop in the new complex. As a courtesy, They laughed, their voices fading as they walked away. I made a note to have that particular security camera footage saved. It would make an interesting addition to tomorrow's presentation. Just then, my father's name appeared on my phone. I let it ring, knowing exactly what he wanted to say. The same speech he'd given countless times to other failing business owners, about progress, about knowing when to step aside, about letting the experts handle things. Instead of answering, I sent a brief text, "See you at the meeting tomorrow." His response was immediate, "This is for your own good, James. Don't fight it." I smiled, remembering how many times I'd heard those words growing up. Don't fight the family's way of doing things. Don't question the Anderson Holdings method. Don't suggest there might be better ways to develop properties than demolishing history. Walking back to my office, I looked at another wall I'd never shown my family, the one displaying news articles and awards Phoenix Enterprises had received for community-focused development in other cities. While Anderson Holdings demolished and built generic retail spaces, we'd been quietly revolutionizing urban development across the state. My phone buzzed one final time, a message from Mrs. Martinez. "My daughter just heard them outside. They're planning to turn my restaurant into a chain steakhouse. Are you sure about tomorrow?" "Trust me," I replied. "This time tomorrow, you'll have a guaranteed lease for the next 20 years, and funds for that kitchen expansion you wanted." Setting my phone aside, I walked to the window again. Sunset Drive was quiet now, but I could almost see its future: preserved historic buildings with modernized interiors, thriving local businesses, community spaces, a model for sustainable urban development. Tomorrow my family would learn that their failing son had outmaneuvered them at their own game. But more importantly, they'd learn that success doesn't always mean demolishing the old to build something generic and new. I spent another hour preparing for every possible scenario. My father and brother were skilled businessmen. They wouldn't go down without a fight. But I had something they never understood: the support of an entire community. Finally, around 2 a.m., I allowed myself to rest. As I got ready for bed, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I saw what my family would see tomorrow: not the struggling bookshop owner they pitied, but the CEO who'd built an empire right under their noses. My last thought before sleep was of my grandfather, who'd sold the bookshop all those years ago. Sometimes, he'd told me once, the best way to preserve something is to let others think it's worthless while you build something greater. Tomorrow everyone would understand exactly what he meant. The next morning, I arrived at the Brighton Development headquarters at 7:15 a.m., deliberately early. My modest appearance, driving my Honda Civic and wearing a slightly worn suit, was calculated. Let them underestimate me one last time. Lisa met me in the lobby, impeccably dressed and carrying 2 leather portfolios. "Your family's already here," she whispered. "Your father's been in with Brighton's CEO for 20 minutes. Perfect." I adjusted my tie. "Is everything in place?" "Conference rooms A and B are both set up. Community members are gathering in B, watching through the one-way glass as planned. Recording systems are active." The elevator ride to the 30th floor gave me a moment to center myself. When the doors opened, I saw exactly what I expected: my father and Michael in deep conversation with Brighton's CEO Robert Winters. "James," my father's tone carried that familiar mix of condescension and pity, "we weren't expecting you so early. Wouldn't miss it." I nodded to Winters. "Interesting choice of venue." Michael smirked. "Brighton Development kindly offered their space. More professional than your little bookshop." If they only knew I owned the building they were standing in. Phoenix Enterprises had acquired it 6 months ago through another shell corporation. The conference room was arranged exactly as I'd specified: a long mahogany table, documents at each seat, and most importantly, the one-way glass wall that looked into Conference Room B, where the entire Sunset Drive business community was gathering to watch. "Shall we begin?" Winters gestured to the seats. "We have the contracts ready." I took my place at the far end of the table, Lisa quietly sitting to my right. My father and Michael positioned themselves near Winters, clearly presenting a united front. "Before we start," my father leaned forward, "let's be clear about the terms. Brighton Development is offering $7 million for the entire block. Given your situation, we've arranged for you to receive a generous portion, despite your minimal equity. I opened my portfolio. Actually, I have some questions about the proposed development plans. Michael sighed dramatically. James, this isn't a negotiation. The decision's been made. Humor me. I pulled out the first document. Your plan calls for complete demolition of all existing structures. Have you conducted a historical impact study? Winters shifted uncomfortably. Our preliminary assessments, because I have. I slid a thick report across the table. 3 of the buildings on Sunset Drive qualify for historical landmark status. Demolition would require extensive regulatory approval. My father's jaw tightened. We have ways around that, like the Weber building downtown. I asked innocently. The one where Anderson Holdings had to halt construction for 6 months due to historical preservation lawsuits. Michael's smirk faltered slightly. The Weber building fiasco had cost Anderson Holdings millions. Furthermore, I continued, have you surveyed the current businesses, calculated the community economic impact? Times change, Winters said smoothly. Progress requires sacrifice. Yes, my father uses that line too. I pulled out another document. But according to these figures, the existing businesses on Sunset Drive generate more revenue per square foot than any of Brighton's recent developments. The room grew tenser. I could feel my father's patience wearing thin. James, he said, you're embarrassing yourself. You run a bookshop that barely breaks even. Leave the real estate decisions to professionals. That was my cue. I pressed a small button under the table, signaling Lisa. Speaking of professionals, she stood walking to the presentation screen. Let's discuss Phoenix Enterprises. The color drained from Winter's face. Phoenix Enterprises was known in development circles for acquiring prime properties and transforming them into highly successful community-focused developments. What does Phoenix have to do with this? Michael demanded. Lisa pulled up the first slide, a comprehensive ownership map of Sunset Drive. Every property highlighted in red. Phoenix Enterprises, I said calmly, owns every property on Sunset Drive. Not just my failing bookshop, every single building. The silence was deafening. Through the one-way glass, I could see the business owners in the other room leaning forward, watching. That's impossible, my father whispered. Is it? I started laying out documents. Here's the deed to Martina's restaurant, purchased 8 months ago. The art gallery, acquired last year. The vintage record store, the coffee shop, the boutiques, all Phoenix properties. Michael grabbed the papers, his hands shaking slightly. These are shell corporations, all subsidiaries of Phoenix Enterprises, Lisa confirmed, which, as of this morning, also owns this building we're sitting in. Winters stood abruptly. This is some kind of trick. Robert, I smiled. Check your phone. Your board should be sending you some interesting news right about now. On cue, his phone buzzed. As he read, his face went through a fascinating range of emotions. Now, I continued, let's discuss my plans for Sunset Drive. Not as a failing bookshop owner, but as the CEO of Phoenix Enterprises. My father's business mask finally cracked. You're Phoenix. Remember that naive proposal I brought you 3 years ago? I pressed another button, and the screen filled with architectural renderings. This is what you rejected. A plan to modernize Sunset Drive, while preserving its character, to build something that serves the community instead of destroying it. Lisa began distributing new documents, the full development plan that Phoenix had spent 3 years perfecting. While you thought I was failing, I continued, I was building something bigger than Anderson Holdings ever was. Phoenix Enterprises now owns prime properties in 12 cities. We specialize in community-focused development that generates higher returns than traditional demolish and rebuild methods. Michael was still shuffling through papers, his face growing paler. These profit projections are conservative, Lisa interjected. Our other projects have exceeded similar projections by an average of 23%. I stood buttoning my jacket. Now, about that meeting with Brighton's board. They've cancelled it, Winters said quietly, still staring at his phone. Apparently they're interested in discussing a partnership with Phoenix instead. Of course they are. I walked to the one-way glass and pressed another button. The glass turned transparent, revealing the gathered business owners from Sunset Drive. Because unlike Anderson Holdings, we understand that real value isn't just about demolishing history to build something generic. My father stood slowly, finally recognizing the full scope of what had happened. His son hadn't failed. He'd quietly built an empire that was now positioned to overshadow Anderson Holdings. Why? He asked simply. Because you taught me well, I replied. You taught me about power, about seizing opportunities, about playing the long game. I just chose to use those lessons differently. I nodded to Lisa, who opened the doors between the conference rooms. Mrs. Martinez was the first to enter, followed by Mr. Parker and the others, all the business owners my family had dismissed as obsolete. Meet my real board of directors, I said. The people who understand that progress doesn't always mean destruction, who helped me prove that preserving a community's character can be more profitable than destroying it. The meeting that followed was unlike anything Anderson Holdings had ever experienced. Instead of demolition plans, we discussed renovation strategies. Instead of generic retail spaces, we talked about enhancing existing businesses. And through it all, I watched my father and brother realize that their failing relative had beaten them at their own game. As the meeting concluded, I held back one final document, the latest valuation of Phoenix Enterprises, showing its worth at several times that of Anderson Holdings. By the way, I said as everyone was leaving, that generous portion you arranged for me, you can keep it. I have other plans for Sunset Drive. The fallout from the Brighton development meeting was immediate and far-reaching. By noon, business news websites were running stories about Phoenix Enterprises' latest acquisition. By dinner, Anderson Holdings stock had dropped 12%. I sat in my bookshop office, watching the sun set over Sunset Drive while fielding calls from investors, reporters, and development companies. Lisa had set up a temporary command center in our back room, coordinating with our teams across the city. Your father's called 6 times, she reported, bringing in another stack of papers. And Michael's trying to get our shareholders' information. Let them sweat, I replied, signing the last of the renovation permits. How's the community meeting going downstairs? The bookshop's main floor had been transformed into an impromptu town hall, where Sunset Drive business owners were reviewing the detailed renovation plans we'd spent 3 years developing. Mrs. Martinez is already picking out new kitchen equipment. Lisa smiled. And Mr. Parker's gallery expansion plans are causing quite a buzz. My phone buzzed, a message from Anderson Holdings board secretary. Emergency board meeting called for 7 p.m. Your presence requested as Phoenix Enterprises CEO. I'd been expecting this. Anderson Holdings had several ongoing projects that now conflicted with Phoenix Properties. They needed to negotiate, but more importantly, they needed to understand who they were dealing with now. Car's ready, Lisa announced. Sure you don't want backup? No, I gathered my files. This one I need to handle personally. The drive to Anderson Holdings felt different now. The building that had once intimidated me looked smaller somehow. The security guard who had smugly watched me leave 3 years ago now scrambled to open doors. The boardroom was exactly as I remembered, all mahogany and leather, designed to intimidate. But this time, I wasn't the junior VP with unrealistic ideas. I was the CEO whose company could buy this entire building without blinking. My father and Michael sat at the head of the table, surrounded by nervous-looking board members. The tension in the room was palpable. James, my father attempted his usual authoritative tone. We need to discuss the implications of your recent activities. You mean how Phoenix Enterprises now controls key properties that affect Anderson Holdings' development plans? I took a seat at the opposite end. Yes, we should discuss that. Michael couldn't contain himself. This is ridiculous. You can't just what? I interrupted coolly. Build a successful company, acquire prime real estate. Isn't that what you taught me to do? The board members shifted uncomfortably. They'd seen the numbers. Phoenix Enterprises' community-focused development model was generating returns that made Anderson Holdings projects look outdated. We have contracts, my father said. Development plans approved months ago. Interesting. I opened my portfolio. Like the River District project, where you're planning to demolish 30 historic buildings to build another generic shopping center. The board members' discomfort increased. The River District project was Anderson Holdings' biggest current investment. Those properties are already under contract, Michael insisted. Are they? I slid documents across the table. Phoenix Enterprises owns 60% of those buildings through various subsidiaries. We've spent the last year quietly buying out your options. The shock in the room was electric. The River District project wasn't just any development, it was supposed to be Michael's crowning achievement, his proof that he could outdo our father. You can't do this, he whispered. Actually, I can. And I'm not done. I nodded to an assistant who'd been waiting outside. She wheeled in a presentation screen. This is what the River District could be. The screen filled with Phoenix's alternative development plans. Restored historic buildings. Modern amenities. Community spaces. A project that preserves character while generating higher returns than your demolition plan. The board members leaned forward, clearly interested. They were business people first, and the projected returns were impossible to ignore. We're prepared to offer Anderson Holdings a partnership. I continued. You can fight us, waste millions in legal battles, and watch your stock price continue to fall. Or you can join us in building something better. My father's face had gone through several shades of red. You planned this. All of it. Of course I did. You taught me to think big, remember, to seize opportunities. To never show weakness. I stood straightening my jacket. I just chose to use those lessons to build rather than destroy. The board members were already whispering among themselves. They could see the writing on the wall. Anderson Holdings' old model of demolish and rebuild was becoming obsolete. Phoenix Enterprises represented the future. The offer stands for 48 hours. I concluded. After that, we move forward with our own plans for the River District. And yes, we have the capital to do it without you. As I turned to leave, Michael found his voice. Why are you doing this? We're family. I paused at the door. Exactly. And family should build each other up, not tear them down. Think about that while you're deciding. Outside, the city lights were coming on. I drove back to Sunset Drive, where the community meeting was wrapping up. The excitement in the air was palpable. These people who had feared losing their livelihoods were now part of something revolutionary. Mrs. Martinez caught me at the door. Your father was here, she said quietly. He looked at everything, asked questions. He seemed different. I nodded, understanding. Sometimes the hardest lessons come from seeing your mistakes through others' eyes. My phone buzzed one last time. A message from the Anderson Holdings board secretary. Board voting tomorrow morning. Your father requests a private meeting tonight. Send him up to the bookshop in an hour. I replied. It was time to finish what I'd started, not with destruction, but with transformation of both a street and a family legacy. The bookshop was quiet when my father arrived. I was shelving books, a habit that had always helped me think. He stood awkwardly by the entrance, looking around as if seeing the place for the first time. Your grandfather used to do that, he said finally. Organize books when he needed to clear his head. I placed the last book on the shelf. I remember. He taught me that sometimes the best way to solve big problems is to do small tasks with care. The silence between us was heavy with unspoken words. Through the window, Sunset Drive glowed with evening activity. Restaurants full, shops still open, life flowing through the street we'd fought over. Show me, he said quietly. Show me what you really built. I led him upstairs to my office, the command center of Phoenix Enterprises. The wall of achievements, the development plans, the community impact reports, everything I'd hidden from him for 3 years. 12 cities, he murmured, studying the maps. All while we thought you were just failing, I finished. That was the point. You and Michael were so convinced that success only looked one way, you never noticed another path being built. He picked up a framed article. Phoenix Enterprises winning a national award for sustainable urban development. Your mother saw it. She always said you had a different kind of vision. The Anderson Holdings way isn't wrong, I said, sitting at my desk. It's just not the only way. Sometimes preserving history while building the future is more profitable than demolishing everything. He turned to face me. The board's going to accept your offer tomorrow. They've seen the numbers. Phoenix's model. Your model, it's the future. And you, I'm stepping down. He said simply. Michael too. The board wants fresh leadership, Someone who understands this new direction. He managed a small smile. Know anyone qualified? Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. The screen showed live footage from Sunset Drive's security cameras. People gathering outside, business owners putting up new signs. The street coming alive with possibility. Look, I pointed to the feed. This is what I was trying to show you 3 years ago. Real development isn't just about buildings. It's about people, community, legacy. My father watched the screen, something changing in his expression. Your grandfather would be proud. He always said the bookshop was more than just a business. I never understood until now. Lisa knocked and entered with final papers. Everything's ready for tomorrow. The Anderson Holdings board is prepared to vote at 9 a.m. Thank you, Lisa. I turned to my father. Tomorrow we can announce the merger. Phoenix Enterprises and Anderson Holdings, combining the best of both approaches. Not destroying the past, but building on it. He nodded slowly. And Sunset Drive, the River District, will be our first joint projects, showing that preservation and progress can work together. That the Anderson family legacy can be about building communities, not just buildings. As if on cue, Mrs. Martinez appeared in the doorway. James, we're ready for the evening gathering downstairs. My father looked confused. I smiled. Every Friday, the shop hosts a community night. Local authors, musicians, artists. Come see what you almost destroyed. Downstairs, the bookshop had transformed. Local musicians played softly in one corner. Mr. Parker had set up a small art display. The smell of Mrs. Martinez's famous empanadas filled the air. This, I said quietly, is real success, not just profit margins and property values, but creating spaces where communities thrive. My father watched the scene. Decades of business philosophy being challenged by the simple power of people gathering, sharing, building something together. I understand now, he said finally. You didn't just build a better business, you built a better way. As we stood there, watching the community we'd almost lost celebrate its new future, I realized something. Sometimes the biggest victories don't come from destroying your opponents, but from showing them a better path. Tomorrow Phoenix Enterprises and Anderson Holdings would merge, creating something neither of us had imagined 3 years ago. But tonight, in a bookshop that had started it all, father and son stood together, watching a legacy being reimagined.